our next two speakers, we have Lucy Steels-Walshaw, who's the Senior Practitioner at York Drug and Alcohol Service, and Stephanie McCusker, hopefully I pronounced that properly, who's the Project Lead at York Women's Centre for Changing Lives, who will be speaking about women's services. So over to yourself, Lucy.
Hiya. Can everyone hear me okay? So I'm Lucy Steels-Walshaw. I'm the Senior Practitioner at York Drug and Alcohol Service.
And I'm Stephanie McCusker. You did pronounce that right. Thank you, Christy. I'm Project Lead at the Women's Wellness Centre in York. So I just wanted to start with an introduction to Changing Lives, just for anyone that isn't aware of what we do. So we provide support across 4 pillars: housing and homelessness, drug and alcohol, employment, and women and children. And there's a lot of crossover between those 4 pillars. We all work together in that kind of like multi-agency format. So the underpinning framework that we use across all our services is called the theory of change. I think there is an image of that Natasha has, just to show you how that works. And we this meets the person where they are with interconnected problems, including trauma, poverty, and low social capital. So you can just see that all these problems are interlinked and rarely present on their own. And then the being, becoming, belonging journey is a way to help people overcome personal and systemic challenges and go on to live flourishing lives featuring self-reliance and autonomy, social connection, safety, dignity, and self-worth. So Lucy's going to talk to you a little bit about the kind of women that are coming into treatment and some of the barriers that we've seen.
Okay, so in order to look at the experiences and engagement of women in the treatment for alcohol, we need to look at who are the women who are seeking alcohol support and what factors lead them into coming into the organisation, what's working well for them and other services, and what can be the barriers to alcohol provision for women. And finally, what we can do moving forward in order to achieve the most effective support and positive sustainable experiences for these women. So looking at who are the women that we get into treatment and kind of what brings women into treatment. So when looking at women's experience coming into treatment, we can begin kind of by looking at societal perspectives around women and their alcohol use. In recent years, there's been a huge movement aimed towards glamorizing and making the drinking of women seem integral to successful lives, having fun with their friends. You only have to look at the huge number of gifts that are aimed at women that have sayings on them, such as Prosecco time, wine o'clock. They're everywhere. They seem to be like the #1 gift for women. And while these may seem like harmless fun, they continue to perpetuate an ideal that alcohol is necessary to have fun and legitimizes the view that everyone has fun to drink. The view of society as a whole, that alcohol is a coping tool for stress and necessary for being able to unwind can be really unhelpful and even have extreme negative consequences for others. So it seems a bit of a cliche to say that the women in our service come from all walks of life, but this is the truth. We see women from all social sectors who do seek help for their problematic alcohol use. Within different demographics of women, there may be different ways in which people use alcohol. And as a society, we can often see these sections of alcohol use as different and some more acceptable than others. So, for example, are there kind of differences between a woman who drinks a bottle of wine every night at home to depictions that we might see in the media of groups of drunk women in pubs and clubs, which is often depicted as being very kind of unladylike? There may be differences in how these scenarios are viewed, but by society, but in reality, the damage caused both physically and mentally is almost identical. The reasons women drink can be very varied, but it's fair to say that problematic drinking is regularly a response to trauma. Alcohol being used as a maladaptive coping mechanism is a very common theme. Alcohol is a drug that can be very effective at changing someone's thoughts and feelings. And if a drug's used in order to seek change, to change your current thought pattern, then this is when a behaviour becomes problematic. seeking to address the underlying trauma behind the woman's alcohol use will achieve the most positive outcome for sustained recovery. Domestic abuse can also be a big reason for problematic drinking. We see this across both drug and alcohol use. Women in abusive relationships can have their substances controlled in a way which means that the abuser has increased control over the person and can also lead to threats around informing others about the problematic substance use. An example of that would be to social services. So women coming into treatment for their alcohol use have almost all had some realization that there's an element of their alcohol use that they can't control, or that this is having a negative impact upon their physical or mental health, or both. We're a voluntary treatment service and only have people in treatment who've agreed to engagement. We do have referrals from children's social care, in which a parent can be referred, but as it's been identified that their alcohol use is in some way negatively impacting upon their children. These women may identify that their children are a reason for them coming into treatment, but hopefully throughout the treatment, they would identify that an element of their alcohol use was problematic and change is necessary for their functioning as a parent. Other women may enter treatment at times of change in their life when they realise alcohol is a part of their identity. When other areas of their lives have changed, such as children leaving home, breakdowns of relationships, and these can all build into the trauma and the reasons for drinking. Other women may come into treatment as they've been informed that their health has become so negatively impacted that they've been advised to make changes in their alcohol use. And it is worth mentioning that women who have maladaptive coping strategies often develop in a response to trauma that can come in the form of many dependencies that aren't just alcohol, such as shopping, working, gambling. So if we take a look now at the barriers to treatment and possibly what isn't working so well at the moment, these can be individual, but breaking down the perceived negative experiences people have before entering treatment can be summarised into several areas. One of the first areas at the drug and alcohol service is the perception that people have is particularly around our building. They don't want to be seen coming in. This idea can be rooted in shame around not attending services and not wanting other people to be aware of their issues. In reality, the waiting area of our service can be a place that people don't want to be and may see in others that they haven't previously wanted to. Victims of domestic abuse may also have instances where they believe that it may be a possibility, reality or not, that they may see their abuser in the service. The stigma of attending a drug or alcohol service can also be rooted in their own personal ideas and conceptions around the type of women who seek and need help. I've seen so many people who on their first appointment have said to me, they're not like everyone else out there, referring to those people in the waiting room. But challenging people's beliefs and preconceived ideas can be integral to a productive relationship around a person's own perception of alcohol use and what is acceptable and unacceptable use of alcohol. Another barrier that women face coming into service is childcare. Women may say they don't want to bring their children into service, or they're unable to find childcare in order to attend the services. Another issue is effective mental health treatment, and it's imperative to many people the success of their alcohol treatment is based on having effective mental health treatment, and the barriers we can face within this can be really frustrating and can lead to prolonged treatment while people wait for mental health support. Mental health services do sometimes say they can't treat a person until their alcohol use is controlled, which leads to situations and discussions around whether their alcohol use can be controlled without mental health support. Women come into treatment often voice the belief that their children, that social care will become automatically involved in their family and their children will be removed. Whilst this is the case, whilst it's the case that social care may need to become involved, we would aim to do this with the consent of the woman and look at the whole system offering support rather than this being a punitive thing, and also to explain that social care would not need to be contacted in every situation. Finally, service limitations can play a huge role in engagement barriers. Funding to treatment services has been reduced and waits are often around 3 weeks at the moment. This can seem a long time to someone who's decided to change because often they need support in that moment. People are also able to see their support workers a lot less frequently, which is why a multi-agency approach is essential in order to try and advise and support clients of the most effective support available, in order to ensure that their underlying trauma is addressed in the most current and positive way.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the processes when a woman comes for some support with alcohol, and kind of what the process is, what's working really well at the moment. So it's essential for anyone who's alcohol dependent and wants to make changes in their drinking to be professionally supported through a process of planned and controlled reduction. And that is because withdrawal from alcohol can be fatal, and that's one of the reasons why it's imperative that the stigma around seeking support is lifted and that we remove these barriers to treatment. Women seeking support for alcohol use are assessed using the SADQ, which is the Severity of Alcohol Dependency Questionnaire, and they're allocated a key worker who'll see them for psychosocial intervention to support them through the theory of change. Prescribing isn't used for alcohol dependency as much as it is in other cases such as opiate misuse, but support does sometimes include clinical prescribing, depending on the needs of the client, and that's overseen by the clinical prescribing team within the service. So there's a huge protective factor when women are engaged in services like ours, which cannot be overstated. We carry out a lot of safeguarding work to address vulnerabilities, and we work really closely with other agencies such as housing, probation, domestic abuse support services, GPs, mental health teams, etc., to deliver joined up and effective safeguarding work. A good example of this is that we sit on MARAC, which is the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference for those who've been identified as at the highest risk of domestic abuse and homicide. One place where a lot of our multi-agency work happens is the Women's Wellness Centre in York. That's commissioned by the PFCC and supports women who have multiple complex needs, criminal justice involvement, or who are at risk of offending or reoffending. The aim is to improve outcome for women as per the Ministry of Justice whole system approach for female offenders from 2018, which recognises the importance of a multi-agency response to address complex needs by bringing local agencies together to address women's distinct support requirements, including experiences of abuse. One of our key priority areas for intervention is addressing substance misuse, including alcohol. And as Lucy's mentioned, for women who are responsible for childcare, accesses to services can be tricky. The Women's Wellness Centre does have a creche. I think Natasha's got a picture of it. It's a really lovely space, and women can have their children on site when they are accessing support. And this really breaks down a barrier and makes the service so much more accessible. And York Drug and Alcohol Service has come up with really creative and flexible ways to conduct appointments with women who have their children with them. Particularly that's come up during the recent COVID lockdowns. They've been able to meet their clients in parks or in the garden at the service. I think we've got a picture of that as well. It's such a lovely garden. And to deliver interventions in these spaces to reduce barriers to access, which does disproportionately impact women. And going forward, we'll be maintaining this adaptive and responsive approach to ensure minimal barriers to service delivery. So women-specific services provide a one-stop shop approach within a women-only environment, and we provide holistic and individual support packages to reduce reoffending and deliver these improved outcomes for our client group. For women who have experienced domestic abuse and sexual violence from members of their own communities, having a women-only space providing support encourages engagement, and gender-specific services provide safety and reduce the hypervigilance we often see in women who have experienced trauma. So this allows a focus on achieving their goals in a secure and, most importantly, trauma-informed environment. Going forward, holistic support is key to achieving positive outcomes for women in treatment for alcohol misuse. Usually there are several connected presenting needs in one person. For example, domestic abuse is a really common support area of many women engaged in drug and alcohol services, but very few refuges accept women who also have an alcohol dependency. Addressing underlying causes of alcohol misuse is essential, and we know that women have better outcomes with a whole system approach, including mental health intervention, which is another very prominent presenting need in our client group. One of the most popular aspects of our timetable at the Women's Centre is our Stephanie Covington trauma course called Beyond Trauma, that seeks to help women understand trauma, the effect of trauma, which includes addiction and substance misuse. And the course teaches positive coping techniques and holds space for women to learn about how maladaptive coping techniques are linked to trauma and how this can be processed. A lot of the women we support are isolated, and so women's centres provide a valuable space for peer support. And there's a group at York Drug and Alcohol called When Women Connect, which is somewhere for women who for the most part live alone and have been using alcohol to cope with isolation, to be together and increase social connection with peers. The team at the Women's Centre is growing in response to the needs that we need to meet. So recently we brought on an outreach team to support women who are engaged in survival sex. This is really distinct from sex work in that survival sex is a way to meet immediate requirements. So this can be alcohol, but it can also be other substances. It can be somewhere to sleep, it can be food. And additionally, we have a Ministry of Justice funded criminal justice worker about to start at the Women's Centre, and this is going to build better links from prisons to the community, support abstinence on release and reduce relapse, which is particularly high risk when someone has left prison.